Sarah Morgan's hands trembled as she pressed a cold compress to her 6-month-old daughter's burning forehead. Outside, rain lashed against the windows of her modest cabin, and thunder rolled across the Montana sky like angry drums, drowning out little Emma's pitiful cries. "Hush now, sweet girl," Sarah whispered, fighting back tears. "Mama's here. You'll be all right." But the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Emma's fever had been climbing steadily since sundown, and nothing Sarah tried seemed to help. Her tiny body burned like kindling, her usually rosy cheeks now flushed an alarming shade of crimson. Spring of 1876 had arrived with relentless storms, turning the roads into treacherous mud pits and cutting off Sarah's homestead from the nearest town of Pine Ridge, some 15 miles away. 3 months a widow, Sarah had learned to manage most crises on her own, mending fences, stretching provisions, even scaring off the occasional wild animal. But this was different. This was her baby, her heart, her world, and she was slipping away. Sarah dipped the cloth into the basin again, wrung it out, and returned it to Emma's forehead. The baby whimpered, her blue eyes glassy and unfocused. "I won't lose you too," Sarah vowed, her voice breaking. "I can't." The sound of hoofbeats cut through the storm's fury, faint at first, then growing louder. Sarah froze, one hand instinctively reaching for the rifle her husband had taught her to use before typhoid had claimed him during the bitter winter. Who would be out in such weather at this hour? Bandits had been known to prey on isolated homesteads, especially those they suspected might be vulnerable. A widow alone with an infant would make an easy target. The hoofbeats slowed, then stopped. Sarah could hear the snort of a horse, the splash of boots hitting mud. She placed Emma gently on the bed, surrounded by pillows so she wouldn't roll, and moved swiftly to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. A tall figure in a dripping slicker stood at her gate, leading a mud-spattered bay horse. The stranger's face was obscured by the brim of a wide hat, but something in his posture, a slight hesitation, suggested he wasn't there to cause harm. Still, Sarah kept the rifle within reach as she cracked open the door. "State your business," she called out, trying to sound braver than she felt. The man pushed back his hat, revealing a weathered face with clear gray eyes that seemed to reflect the storm itself. "Madam, I don't mean to intrude. Name's Adam Calloway. My horse picked up a stone a mile back, and I spotted your light." I was hoping. He stopped short, seeming to register the rifle, the terror in her eyes, and something else, the desperate worry etched across her face. "Is everything all right, madam?" Before Sarah could answer, Emma's wail pierced the night, weaker than before but filled with such misery that Sarah's heart clenched. "Your child?" the stranger asked, his expression softening. Sarah nodded, suddenly too exhausted to maintain her guard. "My daughter. She's burning with fever. I've tried everything, but it keeps rising, and the storm." She gestured helplessly at the churning sky, the flooded yard. The man Adam stepped closer, removing his hat. Rainwater cascaded from the brim. "I know something of fevers. May I?" He gestured toward the door. Sarah hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. What choice did she have? Emma needed help, and this man, this stranger, was the first human being she'd seen in weeks. Adam moved with surprising gentleness for a man his size. He knelt beside Emma, his large hand looking impossibly big against her tiny forehead. "How long has she been like this?" "Since sundown. Nearly 6 hours now." Sarah hovered nearby, ready to snatch her child away at the first sign of threat. Adam's face grew grave as he felt the baby's pulse. "She needs a doctor, and soon. This isn't a simple fever." "The nearest doctor is in Pine Ridge," Sarah said, despair washing over her. 15 miles in good weather. The road will be washed out in places." Adam stood, his decision apparently made. I'll go. My horse is trail-hard and sure-footed. I can be there in 3 hours, maybe less. Sarah stared at him, disbelief warring with desperate hope. Why would you do that? You don't know us. Something flickered in Adam's eyes, a shadow of old pain, quickly masked. No decent man rides past trouble, madam. Not out here. He was already moving toward the door, settling his hat back on his head. Keep her cool as you can. I'll bring back Doc Sullivan or die trying. The words should have sounded like empty bravado, but there was something in his voice, a quiet certainty that made Sarah believe him. Wait, she called as he reached the door. You need to know. I can't pay much. My husband, Thomas, he died this past winter. The farm isn't producing yet, and Adam cut her off with a shake of his head. Keep your money, Mrs. Morgan. Sarah Morgan. Mrs. Morgan. There are things worth more than coin. And with that, he was gone, swallowed by the storm as quickly as he had appeared. Sarah stood in the doorway watching until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the roar of rain. Then she returned to Emma's side, took up the cloth once more, and began to pray. The storm seemed to intensify after Adam left, as if determined to thwart his mission. Sarah measured the passing hours by her daughter's labored breaths and the gradual lightening of the eastern sky. Dawn broke gray and sullen. The rain reduced to a steady drizzle that promised to persist through the day. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes crying weakly, other times lying so still that Sarah would place a trembling hand on her chest just to feel the reassuring rise and fall. He's coming back, sweet girl, Sarah whispered, though she wasn't sure if she truly believed it. The nice man went to get help. By mid-morning, Sarah had begun to lose hope. The stranger had likely gotten lost, or his horse had foundered in the mud, or worst of all, he'd never intended to help at all. Perhaps he'd only wanted to scout the property, to see what might be worth stealing from a vulnerable widow. She was boiling more water to replenish the cooling basin when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of multiple horses approaching. Not one rider returning, but several. Sarah hurried to the window. Through the misting rain, she could make out 3 riders coming up the path. The man in front, tall in the saddle despite obvious exhaustion, was unmistakably Adam. Behind him rode an older man with a salt and pepper beard, saddlebags bulging at his sides, and a young woman Sarah didn't recognize. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. Sarah flung open the door as they dismounted. You came back, she said, the words sounding foolish to her own ears. Adam's face was gray with fatigue. Mud splattered to his thighs, but his eyes were clear and determined. Told you I would. This is Doc Sullivan, and his assistant, Miss Francis. The doctor didn't waste time with pleasantries. Where's the child? He asked, already moving toward the door, medical bag in hand. Inside, sir. This way. Sarah led him to Emma's bedside, explaining the progression of symptoms as the doctor began his examination. Adam remained by the door, dripping rainwater onto the floor, looking uncertain whether to enter further or retreat. The young woman Frances gave Sarah a kind smile as she unpacked various bottles and instruments from the doctor's bag. Mr. Calloway rode like the devil himself was on his heels, she said quietly. Pounded on the doctor's door before dawn. Said there was a baby might not see another sunset without help. Doc hasn't seen him rest a minute since. Sarah glanced at Adam, who was now leaning against the doorframe, eyes half closed with exhaustion. He's a stranger to me, she said. Appeared out of nowhere in the storm. Francis nodded. That's Adam Calloway for you. Man has a habit of showing up when he's needed most. Before Sarah could ask what she meant, Doc Sullivan straightened up from examining Emma. Pneumonia, I'd wager. Advanced but not beyond hope. The fever's the body's way of fighting, but it's too much for one so small. He turned to Francis. We'll need the quinine and the mustard plaster, and boil more water. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Francis prepared poultices while the doctor administered medicines that made Emma cry in protest. Sarah held her daughter's hands, singing softly to distract her from the treatments. Through it all, Adam remained a silent presence, moving only to build up the fire when it flagged or to fetch more water from the rain barrel outside. His quiet competence was reassuring in a way Sarah couldn't quite explain. By mid-afternoon, Emma's fever had broken. The baby lay sleeping peacefully, her breathing still labored but no longer the desperate gasps of before. Doc Sullivan packed his bag, looking satisfied. She's strong, your girl, he told Sarah. Keep up with the medicine I've left every 4 hours. Mind you, and continue the plasters twice daily. The worst is past. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to thank you. All of you. Her gaze moved from the doctor to Francis, and finally to Adam, who stood awkwardly by the window, watching the clearing sky. Payment can wait until your next trip to town, the doctor said kindly. For now, that child needs her mother rested and well. Francis touched Sarah's arm. I've made a pot of stew. There's enough for several days. Just heat it when you're hungry. You've done so much already, Sarah protested. Neighbors help neighbors, Francis replied simply. That's the way of things out here. But we're not neighbors, Sarah said. You live in town. The young woman smiled. Distance doesn't matter much in Montana territory, Mrs. Morgan. We're all just trying to survive. Doc Sullivan and Francis prepared to leave, but when Sarah turned to thank Adam again, she found him saddling his horse alongside theirs. You're going too? She asked, unable to keep the disappointment from her voice. Adam tightened his saddle cinch, not quite meeting her eyes. Best if I do. Doc and Miss Francis shouldn't ride back alone. Roads still treacherous in places. Of course, Sarah said, trying to sound practical rather than bereft. I understand. Adam mounted his bay, settling into the saddle with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. He tipped his hat to her. Glad the little one's on the mend, Mrs. Morgan. Sarah, she said suddenly. Please call me Sarah. Something flickered in his eyes, warmth, perhaps, or regret. Sarah, then. Take care of yourself and that brave girl of yours. And then they were gone, hoofbeats fading into the distance, leaving Sarah standing in her dooryard with the strange feeling that something important was riding away with them. The next few days passed in a blur of medicine schedules, gradually improving coughs, and precious hours of sleep whenever Emma allowed. By the 4th day, the baby was alert again, her blue eyes clear and curious, though she still tired easily. Sarah was hanging laundry in the sunshine the first truly fine day since the storm when she heard a horse approaching. Her heart leapt foolishly before she could temper her expectations. It was probably just a passing traveler, or perhaps a peddler who'd heard there was a homestead in these parts. But when she turned, shading her eyes against the bright Montana sky, she recognized the bay horse and its tall rider immediately. Mr. Calloway, she called, unable to suppress her smile. Adam dismounted, leading his horse to the fence. He looked different in the sunshine, younger somehow, though the lines around his eyes spoke of a man who'd seen his share of hardship. His clothes were clean, his face freshly shaved. Mrs. Morgan. He removed his hat. I was passing by and thought I'd check on your daughter. It was a transparent excuse. No one passed by a homestead this isolated, but Sarah chose not to challenge it. Emma's much improved. Would you like to see her? Adam nodded, following Sarah to the cabin. Inside, Emma lay on a quilt on the floor, contentedly gumming a wooden rattle. At the sight of strangers, she let out a delighted gurgle and waved her arms. A smile transformed Adam's serious face. Well, "Look at you, little fighter," he said, crouching down to the baby's level. "Giving your mama a proper scare, weren't you?" Emma responded by offering him her drool-covered rattle. "She likes you?" Sarah observed, oddly touched by the gentle way this weathered cowboy interacted with her child. "Horses and babies," Adam said with a self-deprecating shrug. "Always had a way with them. It's people I find more challenging." Sarah laughed. "You seem to manage fine with Doc Sullivan and Miss Frances." "Known them a long while." Adam stood, returning his hat to his head. "Doc patched me up more times than I care to count. Frances makes sure I remember to eat something besides trail beans when I'm in town." "Are you from Pine Ridge, then?" Adam shook his head. "No permanent address, madam. I work cattle drives mostly, ranch jobs in between. Whatever pays honest wages." Sarah nodded, trying not to show her curiosity about this man who'd ridden through a storm to save her daughter. "Can I offer you coffee? It's the least I can do." Adam hesitated, then nodded. "That would be welcome." Sarah busied herself at the stove while Adam sat at her small table, looking too large for the modest furniture. Emma continued to play on her quilt, occasionally glancing up at the visitor with interest. "She really is doing well," Adam observed. "Color's good." "Thanks to you," Sarah said, setting a steaming mug before him. "If you hadn't come when you did." Adam shook his head. "Just happened to be passing." "In the middle of a storm? Miles from anywhere?" Sarah raised an eyebrow, sitting across from him with her own coffee. A faint smile touched his lips. "All right, I was lost. Storm confused my bearings. I was supposed to be meeting a man about work at the Mitchell Ranch, but took a wrong turn at Cedar Creek. Lucky for us you did." Sarah sipped her coffee, studying him over the rim of her cup. "Have you always been a cowhand?" Adam's eyes grew distant. "More or less. Grew up on a small spread in Kansas. Parents died of fever when I was 16. Older brother tried to keep the place going, but drought took what disease didn't. Been drifting ever since." The simple tragedy of it, so similar to countless stories throughout the West, made Sarah's throat tighten. "I'm sorry," Adam shrugged. "It was a long time ago. And no family of your own?" The question slipped out before Sarah could consider its propriety. If Adam was offended, he didn't show it. "Never settled long enough, I suppose." He looked around the cabin at the curtains Sarah had sewn from flour sacks, the small shelf of books, Emma's cradle near the hearth. "What about you? How did you end up out here alone?" Sarah told him about meeting Thomas in St. Louis, where she'd been working as a seamstress after her parents died. How they'd married quickly, both orphans hungry for connection, and how Thomas had convinced her that Montana Territory offered land and opportunity for those willing to work hard. "We came out last spring, built this place together." Her voice softened with memory. "Thomas was a dreamer, saw potential where others saw only wilderness. He planned for orchards, wheat fields, maybe cattle someday. And then he got sick," Adam said quietly. Sarah nodded. "Typhoid. It went through the area in January. Hit him hard and fast." She stared into her coffee. "I was already carrying Emma when we came west. She was just 2 months old when he died." "You could have gone back east." "To what?" Sarah shook her head. "This is our home now. Thomas is buried on that rise behind the house. His dreams are in this soil. I owe it to him and to Emma to at least try." Adam studied her face, and Sarah had the distinct impression he was seeing more than she intended to reveal. "It takes courage to stay," he said finally. "More than it does to drift." Before Sarah could respond, Emma began to fuss. The baby had pulled herself up on a chair but couldn't figure out how to get back down. Her frustrated cries quickly escalated to full-blown wails. Sarah moved to help her, but Adam was faster. With surprising gentleness, he scooped Emma up, setting her safely on her feet while steadying her with one large hand. "There now," he murmured. "No harm done." Emma stopped crying immediately, fascinated by this new person. She reached up and patted Adam's beard-stubbled cheek, then laughed delightedly at the rough texture. Something shifted in Adam's expression, a softening, a yearning so quickly masked that Sarah might have imagined it. He straightened up, handing Emma to her mother. "I should be going. That job at Mitchell's won't wait forever." Sarah nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course. Thank you again. For everything." At the door, Adam hesitated. "If you need anything, that is, Pine Ridge isn't so far. I usually spend Saturday nights in town, at the boarding house." Sarah smiled. "I'll remember that." She stood in the doorway with Emma on her hip, watching as Adam mounted and rode away. This time, however, she didn't feel the same sense of loss. Something told her she would see Adam Calloway again. 2 weeks passed. Emma flourished, recovering fully from her illness and becoming more mobile by the day. Sarah found herself constantly retrieving her determined daughter from under furniture or away from the hearth. Spring advanced across the land, turning the meadows emerald and bringing the first wildflowers. Sarah worked from dawn until dusk, planting the vegetable garden Thomas had outlined the previous autumn, mending fences damaged by winter storms, and caring for the small flock of chickens that provided eggs and occasional meat. At night, exhausted but satisfied, she would sit on the porch with Emma, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains purple and gold. In these quiet moments, her thoughts often drifted to Adam Calloway, wondering where he was, if he'd found work at the Mitchell Ranch, whether he ever thought of them. The isolation didn't bother Sarah as it once had. Growing up in a crowded tenement in St. Louis, she'd never known true solitude until coming west. Now she found peace in it, most days at least. But still, there were times when a task required more strength than she possessed, or when the silence stretched too long that she longed for adult conversation, for help, for companionship. It was on such a day, as Sarah struggled to repair a broken wheel on the small cart Thomas had used for hauling, that she heard the now familiar sound of Adam's horse approaching. This time, she didn't pretend surprise at seeing him. "Your timing is impeccable, Mr. Calloway," she called, wiping sweat from her brow. Adam swung down from his mount, surveying the situation. "Looks like you could use an extra pair of hands." "Among other things," Sarah admitted. "This will split when I hit a rut yesterday, coming back from checking the far pasture." Without further discussion, Adam removed his coat and set to work. Sarah watched, admiring the efficiency of his movements, the quiet competence with which he approached the task. "Is Emma napping?" he asked as he worked. "Yes, finally. She fights sleep these days, afraid she'll miss something exciting." Adam smiled. "Smart girl. Gets that from her mother, I expect." The compliment brought heat to Sarah's cheeks. She busied herself gathering up the scattered tools to hide her reaction. "Did you get that job? At Mitchell's?" Adam nodded. "Breaking horses for them. Good pay, but temporary. Another week, maybe 2. And then," he shrugged, "there's always work for a man who can ride. Roundup season's starting. Won't lack for opportunities." Sarah wanted to ask if any of those opportunities might keep him nearby, but she held her tongue. Adam Calloway wasn't a man to be pinned down by expectations. She understood that much about him already. They worked together through the afternoon, repairing not just the wheel but several other items Sarah had been unable to fix on her own. When Emma woke, Adam fashioned her a small wooden horse from a scrap of pine, whittling it with deft strokes of his pocket knife. "You're good with your hands," Sarah observed as Emma crawled around, pushing her new toy. "Necessity," Adam replied. "Man who can't fix what breaks doesn't last long out here." As the sun began to lower, Sarah insisted Adam stay for supper. "I made stew," she said. More than enough for two. Adam accepted with a nod. Obliged. They ate at the small table, Emma in a high chair Thomas had built before she was born. The baby babbled happily, showing off her new sounds and reaching for Adam whenever he looked her way. She's taken quite a shine to you, Sarah noted. Feelings mutual, Adam said, then looked almost embarrassed at the admission. After supper, with Emma finally asleep in her cradle, they sat on the porch as twilight settled over the land. Fireflies began to blink in the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. It's peaceful here, Adam said quietly. You've made something good. Thomas made it, Sarah corrected. I'm just trying not to lose it. Adam turned to look at her, his face half in shadow. Don't sell yourself short, Sarah Morgan. Plenty would have given up after what you've been through. The sound of her name on his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening chill. What about you? Don't you ever get tired of drifting? Adam was quiet so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low, almost confessional. Sometimes. More lately than before. What would make you stop? If you found the right place or the right reason, he finished for her. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them unspoken but unmistakable. Sarah looked away first, suddenly afraid of what she might reveal. It's getting late. Adam stood immediately. I should head back to town. You could stay, Sarah said impulsively. In the barn, I mean. It's a long ride in the dark. Adam hesitated, clearly tempted, but shook his head. Better if I go. But I'll come back, if that's all right. Check on that wheel. Make sure it's holding up. We'd like that, Sarah said. Emma and I. As she watched him ride away into the gathering darkness, Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, trying to understand the complicated emotions this man stirred in her. Gratitude, certainly. Friendship, yes. But there was something else too, something that made her heart beat faster when he was near, something that felt dangerously like hope. True to his word, Adam returned the following week. And the week after that. Each visit brought new repairs, small improvements to the homestead that Sarah hadn't even realized were needed until Adam pointed them out. He built a proper pen for the chickens, reinforced the roof of the barn, and dug irrigation channels from the nearby creek to Sarah's struggling garden. With each task completed, the homestead became more secure, more viable, and Adam became less a visitor and more a fixture in their lives. Emma grew increasingly attached to him, crawling to the door whenever she heard a horse approach, her face lighting up when Adam appeared. For his part, Adam seemed to shed years in the baby's presence, his usual reserve melting away as he played with her on the cabin floor or carried her on his shoulders around the property. Sarah watched their growing bond with a mixture of joy and trepidation. Joy because Emma deserved all the love she could get in this harsh world, and trepidation because she knew Adam's presence in their lives was temporary, a kindness extended, not a commitment made. Late spring gave way to early summer. The days lengthened, the sun warming the earth and bringing Thomas's carefully planned garden to vibrant life. Sarah found herself watching the trail each afternoon, her work slowing as the time of Adam's usual arrival approached. One day in mid-June, Adam appeared leading not just his bay but a second horse, a gentle-looking dun mare with a white blaze. "What's this?" Sarah asked as he dismounted. "Thought you might need your own mount," Adam said somewhat awkwardly. "For getting to town, or if there's trouble. She's steady, won't spook easy. Good with children too." Sarah approached the mare, stroking her velvety nose. "Adam, I can't accept this. It's too much." "Already done," he said firmly. "Found her at a farm over near Elk Creek. Owners moving back east. Needed to sell his stock quickly." Sarah knew better than to ask what the mare had cost. "Thank you," she said instead. "She's beautiful." "Name's Daisy," according to the previous owner, but you can change it if you like. Daisy suits her, Sarah said, already charmed by the horse's calm brown eyes. But I don't know if I remember how to ride. It's been years. Adam's eyes crinkled at the corners. Only one way to remedy that. The rest of the afternoon was spent with Adam teaching Sarah the basics of horsemanship. Emma watched from a quilt spread in the shade, clapping her hands whenever her mother circled the yard on Daisy's back. By evening, Sarah was sore but exhilarated. "I'd forgotten how it feels," she admitted as they cooled the horses down. "The freedom of it." Adam nodded. "Nothing like it in the world." They put the horses in the corral for the night, and Adam accepted Sarah's invitation to supper with his now customary nod. The meal was simple rabbit stew and biscuits, but Adam ate with obvious appreciation. "Best cooking west of the Mississippi," he declared, helping himself to a second serving. Sarah laughed. "Now I know you're just being kind. I've tasted my own cooking." "Nothing kind about the truth," Adam insisted. "My mother would have approved, and she was particular about her kitchen." "Tell me about her," Sarah said, genuinely curious. Adam rarely spoke of his past. A shadow crossed his face, but he answered. "Mary Calloway, strong as oak, gentle as rain, could make a feast from scraps and never complained, even when times were lean." He stared into his coffee. "Taught me to read by lamplight after chores were done. Said a man needed stories as much as he needed bread." "She sounds wonderful." She was. Adam's voice softened with memory. "Fever took her and Pa both within a week of each other. I was 16, my brother Aaron 21. We tried to keep the place going. But the drought," Sarah finished for him, remembering their earlier conversation. Adam nodded. 3 years without decent rain. By the time it broke, we'd lost everything. Aaron headed to California. I went wherever the work was. And your brother? Do you still hear from him?" "Letter every Christmas. He's got a family now. 3 boys. There was no envy in Adam's voice, just a quiet acceptance. "You never wanted that? A family of your own?" Adam met her eyes across the table. "Never met the right woman. Or if I did, I wasn't in the right place to recognize it." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Sarah looked away first, rising to clear the dishes. Later, with Emma asleep and the cabin quiet save for the ticking of the clock Thomas had brought all the way from St. Louis, they sat again on the porch. The night was warm, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. "Will you stay?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Tonight, I mean, in the barn." Adam turned to her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "If you're sure." "I am." Sarah hesitated, then added, "It's nice, not being alone." Adam's hand found hers on the porch rail, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "Yes," he said simply. "It is." That night marked a shift in their relationship. Adam didn't leave the next day or the day after. Instead, he threw himself into the work of the homestead as if it were his own, repairing, building, improving. He slept in the barn loft, took his meals with Sarah and Emma, and gradually, piece by piece, became indispensable to their daily life. July brought scorching heat and the constant threat of prairie fires. Adam taught Sarah how to create fire breaks around the property, and together they dug a deeper well to ensure water through the dry months. On the hottest days, they would take Emma down to the creek that bordered the southern edge of the property. The baby delighted in splashing in the shallows, shrieking with laughter when Adam pretended to be a water monster rising from the depths. Sarah watched them play, her heart full to bursting. She hadn't seen this coming, this gradual, inevitable shift from gratitude to friendship to something deeper, something that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. She still loved Thomas, always would, but the sharp pain of his loss had mellowed into a gentle ache, a memory she could carry without being crushed by it. And in its place, something new had begun to grow, tentative as spring's first shoots, but just as determined to reach the light. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching heat lightning play across the distant sky, Adam broke their comfortable silence. Mitchell sent word. They're starting the big roundup next week. Need every hand they can get. Sarah's heart sank, though she'd known this moment would come. The rhythms of ranch work were as predictable as the seasons themselves. How long will you be gone? 3 weeks, maybe 4. Adam stared at his boots. Good money, though. Enough to see a body through winter if they're careful. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Of course Adam needed to go. He was a cowhand, not a farmer, not her husband. No matter how domestic their arrangement had become, no promises had been exchanged, no future discussed. I was thinking, Adam continued, his voice oddly hesitant, that you and Emma might come into Pine Ridge while I'm gone. Stay at the boarding house for a spell. Give you a chance to meet some folks, attend church maybe. Can't be good for either of you being so isolated. Sarah considered the suggestion. The garden needs tending. And the chickens. Simmons from the next property over could look in. He owes me a favor. Adam turned to face her, his expression earnest in the fading light. It would ease my mind, knowing you were among people while I'm away. The implication that he worried for them, that he cared, warmed Sarah despite her disappointment at his impending departure. All right, she agreed. We'll go, but just for a week or so. Adam's relief was palpable. Good. That's good. 3 days later, Sarah found herself riding Daisy toward Pine Ridge, Emma secured in a makeshift sling across her chest, while Adam led the way on his bay. They had packed light, just clothing and a few personal items. The homestead was secured, the garden mulched against the summer heat, and arrangements made with the neighboring farmer to check on the livestock. Pine Ridge came into view by mid-afternoon, a dusty collection of wooden buildings straddling the stage road, with a church steeple rising above the rest like an exclamation point. It wasn't much compared to St. Louis, but to Sarah, who hadn't seen a proper town in nearly a year, it seemed bustling with activity. The boarding house sat on a quiet side street, a 2-story clapboard structure with a wide porch and clean curtains in the windows. The proprietress, Mrs. Abernathy, was a stout woman with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner that softened considerably at the sight of Emma. "So this is the little one I've heard about," she said, tickling Emma under the chin. "Doc Sullivan said she gave you quite a scare." "She did," Sarah confirmed, surprised that her daughter's illness had become local knowledge. "If not for Mr. Calloway here, I don't know what would have happened." Mrs. Abernathy shot Adam an approving look. "Our Adam's got a good heart, though he'd likely deny it if pressed." She showed them to a pleasant room at the back of the house, overlooking a small garden. "Best I can do on short notice, but it should serve. Meals are at 7, noon, and 6. No gentlemen callers in the rooms, of course, but the parlor's available for visiting until 9. After Mrs. Abernathy departed, Adam lingered awkwardly in the doorway. "I'll head out at first light tomorrow," he said. "The crew's gathering at Mitchell's north pasture." Sarah nodded, fighting a sudden lump in her throat. "We'll be fine here. I know you will." Adam shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Sarah," whatever he meant to say was interrupted by Emma, who chose that moment to voice her hunger with an insistent wail. The moment broken, Adam stepped back. "I'll let you get settled. See you at supper." "Of course." Sarah smiled, though it took effort. "We'll be there." That evening's meal was a revelation for Sarah. The boarding house dining room held 3 other guests besides herself and Adam, a land agent from Helena, a young schoolteacher arriving ahead of the fall term, and an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as the town's retired blacksmith. Mrs. Abernathy's cooking was plentiful and delicious, and the conversation flowed easily around topics from politics to the weather to local gossip. Sarah found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawing out the quiet schoolteacher with questions about her training, listening to the blacksmith's tales of Pine Ridge's early days. Emma, perched on Sarah's lap, charmed everyone with her sunny disposition and curious eyes. Throughout the meal, Sarah was acutely aware of Adam watching her, not obviously, but with a quiet attentiveness that made her cheeks warm whenever she caught his eye. He said little, but his presence across the table anchored her somehow, made this strange place feel safe. After supper, the other guests dispersed to their various pursuits, leaving Sarah and Adam alone in the parlor. Emma had fallen asleep, her head heavy against Sarah's shoulder. "You should put her down," Adam suggested. "I can wait." Sarah nodded, grateful for the chance to compose herself before their goodbye. She carried Emma upstairs, tucking her into the small cot Mrs. Abernathy had provided. The baby sighed in her sleep, one fist curled beside her cheek. "Sweet dreams, my love," Sarah whispered, pressing a kiss to Emma's forehead. When she returned to the parlor, Adam was standing by the window, staring out at the darkening street. He turned at her approach, and something in his expression made Sarah's heart quicken. "Walk with me?" he asked. "Just around the block. It's a fine evening." Sarah hesitated, glancing toward the stairs. "Emma," Mrs. Abernathy said she'd listen for her. Adam assured her, said she raised 5 of her own and can hear a baby stir from 100 paces. Sarah smiled at that. "All right then, a short walk." The evening air was still warm, but a gentle breeze had sprung up, carrying the scent of dust and sage and distant rain. They walked slowly, not touching, but close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. "Thank you," Sarah said after a few minutes of companionable silence, "for bringing us here. For everything, really." Adam shook his head. "No need for thanks between friends. Is that what we are? Friends?" The question slipped out before Sarah could reconsider its wisdom. Adam stopped walking, turning to face her. In the glow of the lamplight spilling from a nearby window, his expression was more open, more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "I'd like to think we're more than that," he said quietly. "Or could be if you wanted." Sarah's breath caught. "Adam, let me say this," he interrupted, the words coming quickly now, as if he feared losing his nerve. "I know it hasn't been long since Thomas. I know you're still grieving, still finding your way, and I'm not asking for promises. But these past months, being with you and Emma, it's shown me something I didn't know I was looking for." Sarah felt tears gathering. "What's that?" "Home," Adam said simply. "Not a place, but a feeling. Being where I'm meant to be, with people who matter." He took her hand then, his touch gentle but sure. "I'm not Thomas. I know that. I'm just a cowhand with calloused hands and not much to offer except hard work and a heart that's yours, if you'll have it." Sarah couldn't speak past the emotion tightening her throat. Instead, she stepped forward and laid her head against his chest. Adam's arms came around her, tentative at first, then more confidently as she relaxed into his embrace. "I don't expect an answer now," he murmured against her hair. "Take the time while I'm gone. Think about what you want, what's best for you and Emma. If it's not me, I'll understand. But if it is—" Sarah lifted her head to look at him. "If it is?" Adam's smile was soft in the lamplight. "Then I'll be the happiest man in Montana Territory." The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Sarah answered with a tentative response of her own, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. It was different from kissing Thomas, not better or worse, just different, like learning a new language that somehow felt familiar all the same. When they parted, Adam pressed his forehead to hers. "I should get you back," he said, though he made no move to release her. Sarah nodded, reluctantly stepping out of his embrace. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, neither speaking, both aware that words would only complicate the fragile understanding they had reached. At the door, Adam kissed her once more briefly, chastely. "I'll be back in 3 weeks," he promised. "Sooner if I can manage it." "We'll be waiting," Sarah replied, and she meant it with all her heart. The next morning, Adam was gone before Sarah woke. Mrs. Abernathy delivered the news along with breakfast, her expression knowing but kind. "Left at first light, just as he said. Asked me to look after you special, though you don't seem the type to need much looking after." Sarah smiled, feeding Emma bits of scrambled egg. "No, but it's nice to be cared for all the same." Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "Man's got it bad, our Adam does. Never seen him so settled, so purposeful. Whatever you've done to him, it's an improvement." "I haven't done anything," Sarah protested. "He's just been kind, helping out at the homestead." Mrs. Abernathy's tone made it clear she wasn't fooled. "Well, kind or not, the man's smitten. And unless I miss my guess, the feeling's mutual." Sarah felt her cheeks flush but didn't deny it. What was the point? In a small town like Pine Ridge, people would draw their own conclusions regardless. The following days took on a pleasant rhythm. Each morning after breakfast, Sarah would walk with Emma to the general store, the post office, or the small park at the center of town. People greeted her warmly, many already knowing her name and situation thanks to the efficient small-town telegraph of gossip. Frances, the doctor's assistant, proved especially welcoming. "I've been hoping you'd come to town," she told Sarah during a chance meeting outside the Mercantile. "It's not right. A young woman and a baby all alone out there." "We're managing," Sarah said, but without the defensiveness she might once have felt. "Adam's been a great help." Frances smiled knowingly. "So I've heard. Doc says he's never seen Adam stay in one place so long. Usually he's gone with the season, like the geese." In the afternoons, while Emma napped, Sarah would sit in the boarding house parlor with her mending or a book borrowed from Mrs. Abernathy's modest library. Sometimes the schoolteacher, Miss Winters, would join her, and they would talk of books and teaching and the challenges of being independent women in a frontier that both tested and rewarded self-sufficiency. On Sunday, Sarah attended church for the first time since Thomas's funeral. The small white building was packed with families from town and surrounding homesteads, all dressed in their Sunday best. Emma, wearing a dress Sarah had carefully made from one of her own worn shawls, drew admiring glances and gentle coos from the congregation. The sermon was simple but heartfelt, focusing on community and mutual support values Sarah had come to appreciate deeply since coming west. Afterward, she found herself surrounded by women eager to meet the young widow Adam Calloway had taken under his wing. "You must join our quilting circle," urged Mrs. Peterson, the wife of the general store owner. "We meet every Wednesday afternoon. Bring the little one, all the children play together while we work. And the harvest social is coming up next month," added another woman. "Best potluck this side of the Rockies and dancing afterward. You'll come, won't you?" Sarah accepted these invitations with genuine gratitude. After months of isolation, the simple prospect of female companionship felt like a luxury beyond measure. 1 week stretched into 2, and Sarah found herself falling into the rhythm of town life with surprising ease. Emma thrived under the attention of so many doting admirers, and Sarah's spirits lifted with each passing day. Yet beneath her enjoyment of Pine Ridge's simple pleasures ran a current of anticipation, a constant awareness that Adam would return, that decisions would need to be made, futures discussed. At night, lying in the unfamiliar bed with Emma sleeping peacefully beside her, Sarah would turn Adam's words over in her mind. Home. Being where I'm meant to be with people who matter. Did she dare build a new life around those words? Around a man she had known for mere months, whose past remained largely a mystery, whose very nature seemed defined by movement rather than stability. But then she would remember the gentleness in Adam's hands as he cared for Emma, the quiet competence with which he approached every task, the way his eyes softened when they met hers across a room, and her doubts would recede like morning mist under the sun's warmth. Halfway through the third week, as Sarah sat on the boarding house porch shelling peas with Mrs. Abernathy, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. A group of cowboys rode down the main street, dust-covered and trail-weary. Sarah's heart leapt, then fell as she realized Adam wasn't among them. Mrs. Abernathy noticed her disappointment. "Mitchell's men," she explained. "Coming in for supplies, most like. The roundup's still going, from what I hear." Sarah nodded, trying to mask her disappointment. "Of course. Adam said it could be 4 weeks." "Patience, my dear," Mrs. Abernathy said kindly. "Good things come to those who wait." 2 days later, Sarah was in the general store, selecting fabric for a new dress for Emma, when the bell above the door jingled. She turned, expecting to see Mrs. Peterson returning from her errand, and instead found herself face to face with Adam. He stood in the doorway, trail dust coating his clothes, his hat in his hands. He looked tired, thinner perhaps, but his eyes lit up at the sight of her in a way that made Sarah's heart skip. "You're back early," she said, immediately regretting the inanity of her greeting. Adam stepped further into the store, closing the distance between them. "Couldn't stay away," he admitted. Mitchell understood. "Where's Emma?" he asked, looking around as if expecting to find the baby hidden among the dry goods. "With Frances. She offered to watch her while I ran errands." Sarah hesitated, then added, "I've missed you." The smile that spread across Adam's face was like sunrise after a long night. "Enough to come home? Or are the charms of Pine Ridge too compelling to leave?" "Home." The word hung between them, full of meaning and possibility. "I've made some friends here," Sarah said carefully. "It's been good for Emma, being around people." Adam's smile dimmed slightly, but he nodded. "Of course. You should stay as long as you like." "But," Sarah continued, taking a step closer, "I find myself missing our porch, and the creek, and the way the light comes through the cottonwoods in the afternoon." Hope rekindled in Adam's eyes. "Is that all you miss?" Sarah smiled, her decision made or perhaps only recognized, for she suspected her heart had known its choice from the moment Adam had appeared at her door in the rain. "No," she said softly, "not all." Adam closed the remaining distance between them, propriety forgotten as he took her hands in his. "Sarah Morgan, I've been thinking about what I want to say to you for 3 weeks straight. Rehearsed it while riding, while roping, while trying to sleep under the stars. And now that I'm standing here, I can't remember a word of it." Sarah squeezed his hands. "Then say what's in your heart. That's all I need to hear." Adam took a deep breath. "I love you. You and Emma both. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. Not just helping out, not just passing through, but staying. For good." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I'd like that very much," she whispered. Their kiss was brief. They were, after all, standing in the middle of the general store but filled with promise. When they parted, Mrs. Peterson was watching from behind the counter, making no attempt to hide her approval. "About time," she declared. "Now, will you be wanting white fabric for a wedding dress, Mrs. Morgan, or shall I order something more practical?" Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Something practical, I think, but perhaps with a bit of lace if you have it." They were married 2 weeks later in Pine Ridge's small church, with Emma balanced on Francis's hip and half the town in attendance. Sarah wore a simple dress of dove-gray cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, a compromise between practicality and celebration that seemed fitting for their circumstances. Adam, freshly shaved and wearing a new shirt that couldn't quite disguise his cowhand's tan, looked both nervous and elated as he spoke his vows. His hands were steady as he placed the simple gold band on Sarah's finger, a band that had once belonged to his mother, carried in his pocket through years of drifting, waiting for the right woman. "I never thought I'd find home again," he told her later, as they danced under the stars at the reception held in the town square. "Never thought I was meant for it." Sarah rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "And now I know better," Adam said, his arms tightening around her. "Home isn't a place. It's where love is." Emma, passed from one admiring townsperson to another throughout the evening, finally fell asleep in Doc Sullivan's arms, exhausted from the excitement and attention. The old doctor handed her carefully to Adam, who cradled her with the natural ease he'd developed over months of care. "Your daughter's a credit to you both," Doc said, his eyes twinkling. "Though I suspect she won't be an only child for long, if my doctorly intuition is correct." Sarah blushed at the implication, but Adam merely grinned. "We're hoping you're right. Document Emma needs brothers and sisters to boss around." They returned to the homestead the following day, their wagon loaded with wedding gifts from the townspeople, practical items mostly, but given with such genuine goodwill that each seemed more precious than gold. Mrs. Abernathy had packed them a basket of food for the journey, and Mrs. Peterson had added a quilt she claimed was just gathering dust, but which Sarah suspected had been made specifically for them. As they approached the homestead, Sarah felt a curious mixture of familiarity and newness. The cabin looked just as they had left it, but the land around it seemed to welcome them with fresh eyes, not as a widow and a drifter, but as a family coming home. Adam helped her down from the wagon, then lifted Emma into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Calloway," he said, the name still new and wonderful on his tongue. Sarah smiled up at him, at this man who had ridden through a storm for her daughter and stayed for them both. "It's good to be home," she replied, and meant it with all her heart. That night, with Emma sleeping peacefully in her cradle, and the moon casting silver light through the cabin windows, Sarah and Adam began their life together as husband and wife. Their coming together was tender, unhurried, the culmination of months of growing affection, of trust built day by day through shared work and quiet conversations. Afterward, lying in the circle of Adam's arms, Sarah felt a sense of rightness, of completion. Thomas would always hold a place in her heart, would always be Emma's father. But Adam was her future, her second chance at happiness, and she intended to embrace every moment of it. "What are you thinking?" Adam asked, his voice soft in the darkness. Sarah smiled, though he couldn't see it. "That sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings." Adam's arms tightened around her. "I thank God every day for getting lost in that storm," he admitted. "For finding you and Emma when I wasn't even looking. And I thank God you stayed," Sarah whispered back. "That you saw something worth stopping for." "More than worth it," Adam assured her. "Worth everything." The years that followed proved the truth of those words. Under Adam's care and Sarah's determination, the homestead flourished. The vegetable garden expanded, fruit trees were planted, and a small herd of cattle, Adam's particular pride, grazed the northern pasture. Emma grew from a baby to a sturdy toddler with her mother's blue eyes and her adoptive father's fearless spirit. She followed Adam everywhere, perched on his shoulders as he mended fences, helping him feed the livestock, falling asleep against his chest on the porch swing as he told her stories of his travels. A year after their wedding, Sarah gave birth to a son they named Thomas Adam, a tribute to the past and a celebration of the present. 2 years later, twin girls arrived, Mary and Anne, completing their family and filling the once quiet homestead with laughter and chaos and joy. Adam never returned to the drifting life of a cowhand. Instead, he poured his considerable knowledge of horses and cattle into building their small ranch into one of the most prosperous in the county. He still worked seasonally for neighboring spreads during roundup, but always returned home each night, unwilling to be parted from his family even for the sake of convenience. Sarah blossomed as well, her natural resilience finding new expression in motherhood and community involvement. She joined Pine Ridge's school board, taught sewing classes from her home, and became known for the jams and preserves she sold at the general store. Every few months, Doc Sullivan would visit, ostensibly to check on the children but really, Sarah suspected, to enjoy the satisfaction of seeing how his patients had thrived. "Best medicine I ever prescribed," he would say, watching Adam swing Emma in circles while the twins toddled after them, was sending Adam Calloway out in that storm, and on quiet evenings, when the children were finally asleep and the day's work done, Sarah and Adam would sit together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. Sometimes they would talk of the future of cattle prices and school lessons and which child had gotten into what mischief that day. Other times they would simply sit in companionable silence, Sarah's head on Adam's shoulder, his arm around her waist, content in the life they had built together. "Do you ever miss it?" Sarah asked one such evening, 10 years into their marriage. "The drifting, the freedom?" Adam considered the question seriously, as he did all things. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity," he admitted. "One man, one horse, no complications." He tightened his arm around her. "But I wouldn't trade this, you, the children, our home, for all the freedom in the world." Sarah smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Even when the twins decided to paint the new calf with berry juice?" Adam laughed, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. "Even then, especially then." They sat together as the first stars appeared, each lost in private thoughts but connected by the bond that had grown between them, a bond formed in crisis, tempered by shared labor, and strengthened by the family they had created together. And Sarah, watching the lights of their home reflected in her husband's eyes, gave silent thanks for the storm that had brought this man to her door, for the illness that had revealed his character, and for the love that had turned two broken paths into one shared journey. Because sometimes, she had learned, the darkest nights bring the brightest dawns, and sometimes a stranger's kindness can blossom into a love strong enough to last a lifetime.